Okay, so today we're going to be starting to work on taking the motor out of this 51 Ford and putting a new motor in. It has the Flathead 6-cylinder engine in it now, and we're going to convert it to the Flathead 8 that's appropriate for this year. So we have this motor, which we found and bought it and tore it apart, fixed the things that needed to be fixed on it, cleaned it up and put it back together. And we've run it on a test stand, so it runs really good. So we're going to be going through the process of pulling the 6-cylinder out and putting this 8-cylinder in. So here's before we start taking the car apart, here's a picture of the 6-cylinder engine. And the reason that we're changing the engine out, this engine actually runs pretty well, but we want to put air conditioning in the car, and that actually is just a lot easier with the 8-cylinder engine. So we're going to go ahead and start working on it, and we'll shut the camera down. We're going to be taking the hood off, taking the radiator, draining all the fluids, and getting ready to pull this motor. So we'll come back to the video once we're done at that stage. So we've been working on the car some. We've got the hood off, the fluids out, and we're taking everything loose now. We've got the exhaust loose, we have the transmission unbolted from the bell housing, and then we actually have to move the car for where the hoist is to lift the motor out. So I made this brace right here that goes under the transmission to hold the transmission up. What I did is just drilled some holes in the frame and tapped them and put this little brace across there, and that'll hold the transmission up while we pull the motor out. And then up here we've got everything loose on the motor. We've got the engine mounts completely loose. We've got 2 bolts, one on each side. When we lift up, they'll just come out, but they'll hold it from moving, during the time when we push it over to where the lift is. So we're about ready to go ahead and hook up to the top of the motor and pull it out. Okay, so we've got the car off the lift now. You can see that the hood's off and the radiator's out. We've got a hoist hooked onto the engine here to go ahead and lift it up. And everything ought to be loose now, so I think when we start to lift it up, we should be able to just slide it ahead, get it off the transmission, and it ought to come right on out. So we'll see how that goes. Look at the back here and see if we're clearing. Oh, I think we're just making it there. I got it. Okay, so we got the engine out. It's sitting on the ground there, and then so we're going to spend a little bit of time cleaning up the engine compartment before we drop that other motor in. It's a lot easier to clean up when you got the motor out. So we're going to do that. We've got some wiring to redo, because one of the things that we're doing with the new motor is we're converting the system, the car, to 12-volt system. So the voltage regulator comes out, and some of that wiring we're going to go ahead and clean up and take care of. So next step is to power wash this inside and see if we can get it cleaned up a bit. Okay, so we have spent some time cleaning up the engine compartment, and we're also converting to 12 volt on this, so I had to change the voltage regulator and the solenoid and some things like that, and put a big fuse in, because we're putting a big alternator in here because we want to be able to drive that air conditioning and the new fan and all that. So, and we also had to rig up a different throttle control. So we're going to try to put this engine in now. I'm not sure that I have all the parts that it takes to make it fit in this 51 Ford. I'm hopeful that I do. We'll figure that out. We're ready to lift it up now and start trying to put it in. Well, we ran into a little bit of trouble when we were putting the motor in, and couldn't get it lined up with the transmission properly. So we ended up having to put it up on the hoist here, pull the transmission back, and push the transmission back on once the engine was in place. We just couldn't get the transmission pilot shaft to line up with everything, the clutch disc and the flywheel and so on. So we put it up and took the transmission loose, and then everything worked fine. And so the engine and transmission are bolted in the car now. Had to do a few things, so I'm going to show you those. Okay, so here's one of the problems that we ran into. This motor actually came out of a truck, a 51 truck, not a car. And so the crankcase ventilation tube, it's this tube right here, is slightly too long, and it actually interferes with the K-member. You can see that right down here, it hits. So I'm going to have to cut that off a little bit so it gets off that K-member. And then I think I actually might put a rubber hose on that, and so I can run it clear down here to the bottom of the K-member and have it bleed out below the engine. The way it is right now, it'll just blow out over the engine, and I'd like to not do that. One of the things I did here, you can see the engine mount there, and I left the bolts real loose. A good idea when you're doing something like this is to, once you get those things to start, leave everything really loose till you get it all in position. Then you can have the ability to do some movement on the engine when you're lining things up, and we certainly had to do that here. So here we are back at the back of the engine, and you can see the bell housing there and the transmission. We had to take the transmission loose and move it back, but now you can see that everything is closed up here and looks really good. So we're ready to finish putting the transmission back in. We need to put the drive shaft on, hook the shifter and the clutch up, and then we've got to start worrying about how to put an exhaust system on. Right now I just have, you can see the exhaust ports there off the block, and I'm going to have to figure out how to put manifolds on there. I've got a couple of different kinds of manifolds. We'll see which one fits the best and see if we can get an exhaust system on this baby while we got her up here up in the air. So when we were putting the motor on, I wanted to go ahead and convert to a 12-volt system. The car was 6-volt. In addition to that, I wanted to go away from the mechanical fuel pump. The old Flatheads have a pretty bad habit of vapor locking, and so we wanted to go to an electric fuel pump. So you can see here I mounted the fuel pump on the inside of the frame rail. I think it'd be fairly well protected here. And then I just cut the main fuel line, the regular fuel line for the car is just on the outside of the frame here. So I put the line over the top and then just cut into that fuel line there. To the back, I just ran a new flexible line all the way back to the tank. So one of the, like I said before, this engine came out of a truck, and I was kind of hoping that the exhaust manifolds and the crossover would work, but they didn't work because the crossover went right above where the K-frame was here, and there wasn't room for it. Fortunately, I had exhaust manifolds and a crossover. What's on here are off of out of the junk pile. Came off of one of the motors that I got. And I think they were off a 53 sedan, but it turned out that the manifolds and this cross piece worked perfectly. So I cleaned them up and put them on. So we've got a good exhaust system here. So you can kind of see the back of the manifold on the right side there, and the pipe comes down, and then I just welded on pipes to go to this bullet muffler, and that's all the muffler we're going to have. And I think that'll work out fine. Okay, so we're moving along here. You can see that we put the radiator in now. We live in Phoenix, and so these Flatheads are always a problem to cool. So I got this beautiful new Walker radiator. I'm hopeful that it will be everything that we need for cooling. And then we've got everything hooked up now. We've got the throttle hooked up and the choke. Fuel's hooked up. We've got a battery in it. And put oil in the motor. So let's go ahead and see if she'll run. Well, we're pretty much done. You can see we've got the hood back on. We have all the fluids in the car. We have it timed, and the engine seems to be running pretty good. So I think we're gonna call this just about done. We don't have an air cleaner yet. This engine came with an air cleaner on it, but as I said, it came off of a truck, and there's a clearance issue. So the air cleaner is too high. So I'm gonna have to try to find one that was appropriate for the car and not for the truck. So we're going to shut the hood and drive it off.